Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing, at which we're going to hear some more evidence from one of the architects at Studio E who was involved in the refurbishment of the tower. Before we do that, can I just mention a topic which is on everyone's lips almost, and certainly in most people's minds, namely the coronavirus, because one or two people have asked us what we're doing about it. Well, there's not a lot we can do about it in one sense, of course, but it's something we are monitoring very carefully. I think we all need to understand that we have a personal responsibility to try to avoid spreading infection, and therefore I will repeat what I said on Monday morning, that if anyone has concerns about their own health, then please don't come into the inquiry. You can watch it remotely and take a reasonable part by doing that. We are keeping abreast very carefully of the latest advice from the government and the National Health Service. Hand sanitizers are available in the public areas. We will continue to keep the position under review, and we will advise you if and when the time comes, when it's necessary to take any further steps. But for the moment, please just accept that we are watching the situation very carefully, and we rely on all of you for your support in the way that I've indicated. Well, having said that, we're now going to hear from the next witness,
Mr. Tomas Rek, Mr. Chairman.
So could you ask Mr. Rek to come in, please? Thank you.
Repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rek. Sit down and make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rek, good morning.
Good morning.
Can I start, please, by asking you to give the inquiry your full name?
My name is Tomas Rek.
Thank you very much for coming to the inquiry and helping us with our investigations. We appreciate it. I'm going to be asking you some questions today. If you have any difficulty understanding the questions that I'm asking you, or you would like the question put in a different way, please just say. Can I just also ask you, please, to keep your voice up so that the transcribers who are sitting to your right can hear you and get down accurately your answers?
Sure.
Now, you've made a witness statement for the inquiry, and it should be in a folder on the desk in front of you there. And it will also appear on the screen in front of you. And you will also see documents that I refer to come up on the screen in front of you, and we'll be looking at those together. If you look at the statement, please, it's SEA 000142278. And can I ask you to start by going to page 35, please?
Yes.
And you'll see that it's dated the 9th of November 2018, above which is your name, Tomas Rek, and a signature above that. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Now, you've also provided Exhibit TR1. Can we please bring that up? It's SEA 000142277. And that's the front page of it, and there are documents which follow that, and it's some 9 pages long. Just scrolling down that, please, can you confirm that that is your exhibit to your witness statement?
Yes.
Thank you. Have you read this witness statement recently?
Yes.
Can you confirm that its contents are true?
Yes.
And have you discussed the evidence that you're going to give today with anybody before coming here this morning?
I would be in contact with the lawyers, RPC.
Right.
And, Bruce, occasional email.
Right. Have you discussed the evidence that you're going to give, the answers that you're going to
No.
you may give to my questions? No. Right. Now, you worked on the Grenfell Tower project from September 2013 to December 2013, so about 4 months. Is that right?
September. Yeah, less.
Less.
3.5.
Right. Well, I'm only going to ask you questions about your direct involvement during those months and what you came to know about and do on the project during that time. Can I start then by asking you some questions about your qualifications and your experience? You were employed, I think, by Studio E LLP between December 2011 and December 2013. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in December 2013, you were made redundant, I think.
That's correct.
Do you know how many people were made redundant at that time?
Handful, I don't know, 5. I don't recall the exact number.
Now, you now work, I think, as an architect in Copenhagen, yes?
Yes.
When you were working for Studio E LLP, were you a registered architect?
Yes.
You were. Were you a member of RIBA?
No.
You were not. Now, in paragraph 7 of your witness statement, if we can just have that up on the screen, please. You'll find that at page 3. You see that you say there that you obtained a degree in architecture from the University of Technology in Brno in the Czech Republic in 2005, and then you qualified as an engineer architect in architecture and urban planning.
Yes.
And like you say, I have practiced as an architect for 8 years. Is that 8 years as at the date of the statement, or 8 years as at the date of the fire, or 8 years at the date of your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project?
Must have been at the date of my involvement, 2013.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at the training you had at the University of Technology in the Czech Republic, did you learn, or did your course cover technical aspects of fire safety in and around buildings?
Do not recall that.
You don't recall. Do you recall whether it covered fire spread, internal or external fire spread?
Don't think so.
So would it follow that you didn't learn anything as part of your formal training on facade materials which would be used in an overcladding system?
No.
And can I ask perhaps what might sound a silly question in the light of that, but presumably you didn't cover the requirements of the building regulations in England and Wales?
Of course not.
No. The word engineer-architect is something or a phrase you use in paragraph 7 of your statement. Is that a specialism within architecture?
That's how all architects are called in Czech Republic when they finish education as an architect.
I see.
It's just a common term.
I see. Okay. Now, you say in your witness statement at paragraph 8, which you'll also see on page 3, that you practiced as an architect for 8 years. We've been through the 8 years. Prior to working for Studio E, where did you work?
It would have been 3 different practices in London. Well, one of them was in Enfield.
I see. And in what capacity did you work in each of those 3 practices? Do you remember?
Well, I would start as an architectural assistant.
Right.
Because I didn't do my part 3 until 2010.
Right.
So I wouldn't become a registered architect 2010, which is a year before I started at Studio E.
I see. So you were an architectural assistant throughout the period you worked for those 3 practices.
I would have been an architect in the last practice.
I see.
Because I would have had the qualification.
So after 2010?
Yes.
Yes, I see. In any of those practices, did you have any, or did you gain any experience on refurbishing an existing high-rise residential tower block?
No.
No. Which sectors did you generally work in those 3 practices?
Mainly educational.
Now, you told us that you completed the RIBA Part 3 in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
That was in London, was it?
Correct.
Yes. And would I be right in thinking that in doing that you covered the requirements of the building regulations?
Yes.
Yes. And as an architect and an employee of Studio E, were you required to undertake continuing professional development, or CPD?
It was voluntarily, and I did.
You did. Did you keep any records of your CPD?
I would just keep the certificates, which we would receive after the seminars, in a folder, like
Right.
a paper copy.
I see. Did you keep those records yourself? Or did Studio E keep them?
Can't recall. I might have taken them with me when I finished my employment at Studio E, but don't have them anymore.
Do you specifically recall keeping your CPD records during the years 2012 and 2013?
I don't specifically recall, but I think that's what I did, because I thought I might use them in the future as a reference
I see.
if I wanted to be registered at RBA or something.
Right, I see. Now, I'm going to turn to your role at Studio E and the briefing that you received on the Grenfell Tower project. You worked as a project architect during your time at Studio E, didn't you?
Correct.
Yes. And you reported at all times to Mr. Sounes, is that right?
No, I was sitting in the other side of the office, so I was reporting to another associate and another partner when I was working on that Bolingbroke Academy.
I see. What was your formal job title or your job status as at 2013 at Studio E?
I was a project architect, on the academy.
Right. When you came into the Grenfell Tower project, would I be right in thinking that you were reporting to Mr. Sounes?
Correct.
Yes. So he was. Can we take it that he was supervising your work on the project?
Yes.
Yes. Now, at this time, September 2013, which is when I think you came into the Grenfell Tower project, am I right in thinking that the project had been developed to RIBA Stage D, Design Development?
Yes.
Yes. Can we turn up the stage, can we turn up your report, I'm sorry, your statement, SEA 000142778 at page 5, so 2 pages on from where we are. And I'd like you, please, to look at paragraph 14. You say there, I was tasked by Bruce with developing the NBS specification and drawings further so that the NBS specification, architectural drawings and tender documents could be completed and issued as part of the pack of documents for tenderers. See that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then you say, usually the successful tenderer or specialist subcontractor for the successful tenderer would use these documents as a starting point for their further detailed design development. So just to be clear, your role at the start of your involvement on the Grenfell Tower project was to develop the NBS specification and drawings, as you say. Just to be clear about that. Yes. Can I ask you, how complete was the NBS specification at the time when you first started developing it?
Something I don't recall, and unfortunately I wasn't able to retrieve any evidence of the draft statement of the specification when I took it over.
I see. When you say the draft statement, you mean the NBS?
The NBS, yeah.
I see. Just doing the best you can to recall, and maybe you can't. Do you remember whether Mr. Sounes or anybody else at Studio E had already done some initial work on the NBS specification?
Yes.
Or was it completely blank?
It wasn't completely blank.
Right. And again, I'm sorry to ask you, but doing the best you can, do you remember which parts of the NBS specification had already been completed before you started working on it?
No, I can't recall that.
Okay, all right. Now, can I ask you to go back to, or back a page in your statement to paragraph 10, and you say, there, if you look at 3 lines up from the bottom, you say, my involvement in the project was, for me, to my understanding, filling the gap until another project came up. I reported to Bruce Sounes at SELLP. Bruce was my supervisor at SELLP. Just looking at the evidence there about the gap, did you believe that the purpose of your involvement it was to keep you occupied until another project came up?
Yes.
What caused you to think that?
A brief chat with Andre and Bruce at the time of the redundancies.
Yes, okay. And at the time of the redundancies, you were made redundant in December, but we know you started working in September 2013. So does that mean that there were redundancies in September or perhaps earlier in 2013?
I don't recall exactly, but it's a long process which takes over a couple of months.
Right. Just to be a little bit more focused, the brief chat with Andre and Bruce, which caused you to think that you were getting involved in the Grenfell Tower project to keep you occupied until another project came up. That chat, did it occur prior to you working on the MBS spec in September, or was it another time?
I don't remember.
Right. Was the gap that you're talking about a staffing gap that you were filling, or a work gap? In other words, you didn't have enough work to do, so you were given this.
Well, I was finished with my engagement at the academy. I don't think there was another assignment other than Grenfell for me.
Right.
Yeah.
I see. When you started working on the Grenfell Tower project, did you know that you would only be involved in it for 3 or 4 months?
No, I didn't.
Right. Now, if you look at paragraph 12 of your statement, please, which is at page 4, just a few paragraphs, or 2 paragraphs below 10, which we're looking at, you say there, I was first briefed on the project on the 18th of September 2013 by Gary Stewart, as Bruce Sounes had been called into meetings that day, and I started by reading the Stage D documents and reviewing the draft drawings and sketches. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what Mr. Stewart told you to do?
Exactly what's written below. Reading the Stage D report and looking at the drawings available to me at the time.
Right. Did he direct you to any particular documents, do you remember?
No, just the Stage D report.
Right. Now, I think it's also right that Mr. Sounes also relayed further information to the project, about the project to you, on an as and when required basis.
Yes.
Yes. Do you remember him briefing you about the aesthetics of the facade?
Yes.
Do you remember when that was?
It would have been at the outset.
At the outset.
Yeah.
Do you remember whether at the outset there was any discussion about fire safety?
I do not recall that.
Was there any discussion after the outset about fire safety?
Do you mean during the duration of those all 3 months?
Yes.
I believe we would have been discussing the cavity barriers.
Cavity barriers. All right. Well, we'll come
Yeah.
to look at those later. Can I turn to a different topic, which is your personal and professional knowledge of the building regulations and approved document B. Now, at the time of the project, how familiar were you, say, last quarter of 2013, how familiar were you with the requirements of Schedule 1, Parts B3 and B4 of the building regulations?
I think to a certain extent I would have been aware of those parts, but I probably, I don't know whether I would read them back to back.
Right. Same question. How familiar were you in respect of the provisions of approved document B concerning Schedule 1, Part B4, Subpart 1 of the building regulations, external fire spread?
I know I came across that subject in a previous project, so I was aware of it.
Can you tell us what that project was?
It was secondary school in East London.
Right, so not a high-rise building.
No, that was
Right.
4 stories.
And what did you learn about approved document B, Schedule 1, Part B4, on that project?
I think on that project, the building was quite close to an existing terrace houses, and we were looking at the relevant boundary and the proximity, and how that one part of facade needed to be class 0, I think.
I see. Class 0, class 0. Did you have... Well, let me ask you. First of all, you've just mentioned facade. Was there a facade on that building?
I think it was that part was a rendered or brick, I can't remember. It was a rendered and brick building.
Did your involvement on that project involve input into external wall construction?
Yeah.
Was there any consideration of insulation or insulation products in that external wall construction?
Must have been.
Do you remember? You say must have been. Why must there have been?
That there was a thermal insulation, and it would have been specified. So.
Right. You say it was a rendered and brick building. So does that mean there were no panels forming the exterior surface?
No. Yeah, it wasn't a rain screen.
Not a rain screen.
Like, no.
Right. Okay. And what did you learn from that project about the combustibility requirements contained within ADB, Section 12, in relation to external walls?
I think back then we satisfied ourselves with just confirming that the elements, the surface of the facade, I think was that the render was class 0 and therefore compliant.
Right. What did class 0 mean to you?
External spread of flame.
What is class 0? Or what was class 0? I think is what was.
That the surface of the material applied to the facade wouldn't encourage spread of flame, or it wouldn't burn.
Right.
On the surface. Yeah.
How did you go about satisfying yourself on that project that the surface of the building on that project was class 0?
I think we would look up the data sheets of the material, BBA certificate.
Right. Okay. Were you familiar then, or did you become familiar as a result of that project with BBA certificates and how to read them, how to interpret them?
I knew they existed and that they were certificates explaining the behavior of materials on different aspects, not just fire.
Do you remember reading the BBA, the relevant BBA certificate for that project?
I don't remember that.
No. Do you remember there being discussion within Studio E of the need to look at that certificate when assessing whether or not the exterior complied with the requirements or guidance in approved document B?
Don't recall that.
Okay. Can we? Can I just ask you this? Were you, at the time of your involvement on the Grenfell project, familiar with the guidance contained in the CWCT standard, the Centre for Windows and Cladding Technology standard?
I know a guidance existed, but I didn't read it.
Right. Okay. We'll come back to that. What about the BCA guidance that was issued from time to time by the BCA, the Building Control Alliance?
Don't know that.
No?
No.
Okay. What about other industry standards which issued guidance from time to time about compliance with requirements of Schedule 1 Part B 4 of the building regulations?
No.
Okay. Can we look at your statement at paragraph 140, please, which you'll find on page 34. It's the very end of your statement. And you say there, after I left SELLP, I was involved in the design of a high-rise building where Celotex FR 5000 was also specified. On that project, Exova had produced a desktop study comparing the rain screen facade cladding with Celotex's tested sample, and they had concluded that it complied with BR 135. You see that?
Yes.
At the time of your involvement on the Grenfell Tower project, September to December 2013, were you familiar with the various different available routes to compliance with ADB 12.5 in relation to external wall construction?
No, not specifically.
So looking at paragraph 140, let's just look at that in a bit more detail then. You say you were involved in the design of a high-rise building. Where was that building? What was it?
It was in Bromley.
Bromley. What was the name of the project?
It was called Bromley South Central. It was a mixed-use residential newly built development.
Right. Which organisation were you working for when you were involved in the design of that building?
Guy Holloway Architects.
I see. And were you involved in that aspect of the high-rise building which specified products for use in the external wall?
Yes.
Was it it's a cladding? It was a cladding, was it?
Yes.
Was it a cladding of an existing building or a new building?
New build.
It was a new build. Can you remember the dates of when FR 5000 was specified in that project?
No, I wouldn't remember the dates.
Can you remember the date when Exova, or roughly the date when Exova produced the desktop study that you refer to?
I can only guess.
But no, I don't want you to guess. If you can't remember, you can't remember.
No.
Can you give us some parameters there at least? When did you first start working on that project?
I think it would be right at the outset when I got employed, which would be straight after I left Studio E.
Okay. And when did your involvement come to an end in that later project?
That would be May 2017.
May 2017. Okay. Okay. When Exova did the exercise of producing a desktop comparing the rain screen facade on that project with Celotex's tested sample, was that a new approach to you?
It was.
It was. So that was. Can I take it that wasn't an approach that you were familiar with at the time of your involvement on the Grenfell Tower project?
No.
I see. When you started work on the Grenfell Tower project, were you told anything, either by Mr. Sounes or Mr. Stewart or anybody else, about what route to compliance with the building regulations, with approved document B, Studio E had taken in respect of the refurbishment of the facade?
I don't recall any discussion about that.
Okay. Did you yourself give any consideration to Studio E's route to compliance with ADB in that respect?
I don't think I did.
Were you familiar with the requirement, or the guidance, I should call it perhaps, in ADB, or rather in Schedule Part B4, Schedule 1 Part B4, that the external walls of the building should adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls?
I mean, my recollection is failing me a little bit. I know I was aware of the Grenfell, but at the time of my involvement on the Grenfell project, I simply don't remember.
Okay, let me see if I can help you a bit
Yeah.
with your recollection by showing you the relevant provision. It's CLG 173. And this is approved document B, which came into effect in April 2007, which is what you would have looked at the time if you had. Can I take you to page 94? And at page 94, you see guidance at the top, and halfway down the page, introduction, and you can see external walls. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if you go back a page, I think, in fact, I've taken you to the wrong page. If you go back a page, you'll see external fire spread, B4. You see it there?
Mm-hmm.
The external walls of the building shall adequately resist spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another, having regard to the height, use, and position of the building. So that was the regulation at the time. And my question is, did you were you familiar with that at the time of your work on the Grenfell project?
I mean, I assume since I came across, as I explained, a similar aspect on a previous project and in previous employment, I must have been aware of,
Yeah.
to a certain extent, of external fire spread.
Right. So can we take it that you are aware of the principle, if not the precise language in the regulation?
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you realise that would require you to consider, or Studio E to consider, the fire performance of each of the components of the cladding system, including the particular type of cladding panels and the insulation specified for the system?
I don't think I knew that at the time.
I see. If you turn on, please, 2 pages in the same document to page 95, you can see paragraph 12.5, external wall construction. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
And just read that to yourself, if you would. The external envelope of a building. You see that?
Yes.
Should not provide a medium for fire spread if it is likely to be a risk to health and safety. And then you see in the second paragraph underneath that, external walls should either meet the guidance given in paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9 or meet the performance criteria given in the BRE report, which is BRE 135, for cladding systems using full-scale test data from BS 8414, either the 2002 or 2005 versions. Were you familiar with those precise alternative routes to compliance contained within paragraph 12.5 itself?
Not at the time of my involvement at Grenfell.
Right. Just taking this very quickly then, if I can I just ask you to look at 12.6 at the foot of page 95, external surfaces. The external surfaces of walls should meet, and then flip the page, the provisions in diagram 40 where a mixed use building includes assembly and recreation purpose groups, accommodation, the external surfaces of walls should meet the provisions of diagram 40C. Were you familiar with that provision or the principle contained in it at the time of your involvement?
Again, I think that refers to that diagram with 6 different types of scenarios, and
it does.
I remember that one from the previous employment and the previous project.
Yes, I see. And looking at 12.6 and the reference to diagram 40, which we can look at if we need to, but were you familiar with the fact that it required national class 0 or European class B as the surface component on buildings over 18 metres?
Yeah.
Yes. And just looking on at paragraph 12.7, insulation materials and products, in a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, not including gaskets, sealants and similar, etc., used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility, see Appendix A. This restriction does not apply to masonry cavity wall construction, which complies with diagram 34 in section 9. Were you familiar with that principle?
Not at the time at my involvement at Grenfell. It came later.
Did you understand at the time that in the case of a cladding system which incorporated material for insulation which was not of limited combustibility, which complied with paragraph 12.7 and Appendix A, the only route to compliance of such a system with the building regulations was by demonstrating that it had passed an 8414 test and met the BR 135 criteria?
I didn't know that at the time.
Or alternatively, had a desktop system, such as you came across later? No?
No.
And what about a bespoke fire-engineered solution as a route to compliance? Were you aware that that was a possibility?
Again, that I learned much later.
I see. As far as you were aware at the time, were you aware that the overcladding system proposed for Grenfell during your time on the project was not tested itself to BS 8414 in order to meet the BRE 135 criteria?
I didn't know whether it was or wasn't.
Okay. And similarly, no holistic fire engineer report for it? No. You're shaking your head.
No,
I'm the person who said no, but if you say no, it goes on the transcript as your evidence. Thank you. Can I now turn to the NBS specification? And I'm going to ask you about this generally, first of all, and ask you a little bit about the CWCT 2008 guidance. Before we look at the NBS specification in any detail, can you just explain to us what a specification for a project like this actually is?
It's a written document either describing or prescribing elements of the building and their performance.
Yes. And could you just help us? What does it look like? If I want to fill out an NBS specification, what does it look like?
It's a program.
Right. A computer program.
Computer program, and there's a lot of pre-written clauses you can choose to include in your printout or the published document, or you can write bespoke clauses.
Yeah.
It allows both.
Yes. And would you agree with me that on a project like Grenfell Tower, the specification, which formed part of the employer's requirements, was a particularly important document?
Yes.
Now, let's look at the NBS specification for Grenfell Tower. It's SEA 00000169, please. Now, this version is dated the 30th of January 2014, and this is the final version, and I appreciate, Mr. Rek, that you had left by this point, but there were two earlier editions of this document in November 2014.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we can see those, but we can work from this one because it's the final edition. Generally, would you agree that it's on the basis of the content of this specification that a tendering company can undertake an assessment of how much it would cost to undertake a project?
Yes.
Yes. And ultimately, whether to put in a bid, and if so, how much?
Yes.
Yes. And it's possible, and it sounds like a simple question, but it's possible, isn't it, to have different types of specifications?
Yeah, if you imply you can prescribe or describe certain elements, yes.
Yes, and indeed, Miss Grange explored those with Mr. Sounes, but let me just see if I can get your evidence on it. Would you agree that there's a specification that you could ask for in the NBS spec which indicated a desired outcome in relation
I believe
to...
so, yeah.
Yes, and you'd call that a performance specification, would you?
Yes.
Yes. And do you agree with me that that would provide the main contractor or the subcontractors with a very large amount of discretion as to the type of products and the actual materials to be used in order to achieve the specified outcome?
Correct.
Yeah. And then alternatively, is it possible to specify in the specification full details and criteria for the product which it's got to meet?
Yes.
And that would be a prescriptive specification, would it?
Yes.
Yeah. And that would then give the main contractor or subcontractors a choice to select between different materials which would meet the criteria of the product type specified.
Yeah, they would have the freedom to suggest an alternative.
Yes. And then there's a third type, proprietary specification. Yes?
Yeah.
And would I be right in thinking that that would provide a narrowly defined set of parameters that would not permit contractors to propose alternatives to the product specified?
Don't know about that.
Well, what would you understand by the phrase proprietary specification?
To me, prescribed and proprietary was more or less the same.
I see. What would you call a specification which specified products by name in the NBS itself?
That would be prescribed.
I see. Okay. Would you agree that it's up to the architect or the client to decide how prescriptive the specification is?
Yes.
Yeah. And would you also agree that the design has to be developed in accordance with the NBS specification?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and again, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but would it be right that the NBS specification would control the precise amount of discretion or flexibility that the contractor would have in developing the design?
I mean, to my understanding, the contractor always had a choice to put forward an alternative, even though you prescribed exactly what materials or components you would like to have involved in the project.
Right. Is your understanding general, or is your understanding is your understanding on this project?
It was on this project as well.
Right. I see. Now, looking at, if we can, please, page 9 of your statement, if we can go back to that, which is SEA 000142278. I'd like you to look, please, at paragraph 25.4. And at 25.4, you say, Studio E included the NBS, the standard NBS design and performance specification for rain screen cladding at clause H92/310 of the NBS specification. You see that?
Yes.
Which required the building contractor to comply with CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes, among other criteria, including Part 6, which related to fire performance. See that?
Yes.
And then if you look at paragraph 134 of your statement, if we just go on to that, please, which you'll find on page 33. You say, I included the standard NBS specification precedent H92 for rain screen cladding, which required the building contractor to comply with the CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes. I did not specify bespoke design or fire performance requirements for the thermal insulation. See that?
Yes.
And I just want to focus with you on your prescription of the CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes. Can we look at it? It's at SEA 0000169 at page 68. Now, this is within the spec itself, first of all. This is where we see it being specified in the spec. And if you look at paragraph or clause 220 there on page 68, it says, do you see, specification, compliance standards, the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, standard for systemised building envelopes. Reference information for the duration of the contract keep available at the design office, workshop and on-site copies of the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, standard for systemised building envelopes, publications invoked by the CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes. Now, you told us earlier in your evidence this morning that you weren't familiar with the contents of the CWCT standard itself. Is that's correct, is it?
That's correct.
So, can you explain how come you... Well, let me first of all start. Was it you who put the CWTC standard into the specification there at paragraph, 220 as we see?
I don't recall. It could have been me. It's a standard pre-written clause you can take in to be included in the document.
Yes, and when it was included, do you remember whether you applied your mind to whether it should be there or shouldn't be there?
I think I do recall that I was thinking it should be there.
Right.
Yes.
Can we look at page 69, please, the next page, which is paragraph 310, or clause 310, still within the spec, where you can see design performance requirements, CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes, and then the different elements of the CWCT standard as they're set out. And there are 7 of them or so, and part 6 is fire performance. Do you remember that being part of the NBS spec?
I would have read it. So
read it.
Yes.
Do you think it was there before you started developing the spec, or did you put it in?
That I don't recall.
You don't recall. Can we look, please, at INQ 000111339? And this is an extract from the NBS software package.
Mr. Millett, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we've got a problem with one of our computers, which
right.
has been updating itself and now is not scrolling the transcript. So
Right.
is there any way that someone from the technicians' room could come and help us
Yes,
even quicker? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, should we just take a pause but not a break?
Well, I don't think this is going to take very long.
It won't.
Right. Well, the Zist Fund suggests you carry on, and we'll pick it up as we go.
All right, but if you get into difficulties, Mr. Chairman, we can always pause or break. But before I go to what I'm about to show you, Mr. Rek, can I just ask you, what was the purpose of placing the specification, or placing in the specification, the precise reference to the CWCT standard and the other details we've just looked at?
I believe to safeguard compliance with those standards.
Safeguard compliance with those standards and safeguard compliance with ADB, perhaps?
I don't think there's a reference to ADB.
Okay. Let's look then, please, at INQ 000113339, which I think you've got on the screen there, which is paragraph 220. This is I should tell you what this is. This is an extract from the NBS software package from the November 2013 version of the NBS. And the inquiry asked the NBS to provide it with its software, including what would have been available at November 2013, Mr. Rek. So just so you know what it is. First general question is, would Studio E usually, do you recall, make sure that the software it was using was up to date? The NBS software?
So.
Yes?
I believe so.
Yes. Do you recall whether you were using a version of the NBS software to develop the NBS specification, which had incorporated all the NBS updates?
I trusted it was, yeah.
Right. Does that mean you didn't check yourself?
No.
Okay. Do you have any reason now to think that you weren't using the up-to-date NBS software?
No.
Okay. Now, looking at this screen, this is a screenshot from the NBS, the specification, and we can see that the CWTC standard is a standard NBS clause that's automatically inserted into H92 of the NBS, the H92 section. Yes?
Yes?
Were you familiar with that at the time?
Yes.
If you can also look, just to complete this, at INQ 000111365, we can see that clause or paragraph 310, CWCT standard for systemized building envelopes, and then the different parts, including Part 6 fire performance, were also part of the standard NBS clause that gets inserted into the H92 section of the NBS at the time.
Yeah, it's offered for inclusion, and you just change that question mark to a green tick, and then it's in the document.
Right. Can I just go back to the NBS spec itself, SEA 000000169 at page 68, and look at clause 220. You can see there that there's that the words reference information for the duration of the contract keep available at design office, workshop, and on site. Copies of the standard, CWTC standard, and the publications invoked by the CWTCT standard. That does not appear to be part of the standard form. Do you know who inserted that in? Or perhaps it was part of the standard form. Do you remember?
I'm missing to understand what's the difference.
Do you remember whether you made a decision to include that second bullet point under section 220, which required the CWCT standard and publications to be kept at the design office, workshop, and on site?
Isn't that part of the standard clause?
Well, it may be. My question is, did you focus on that and make a decision to include it?
I do not recall, but I might have.
Okay. Now, can we just look at the CWCT standard quoted in the NBS spec? And I know you say you weren't familiar with it, so my questions may not take terribly long, but let's just look at it. It's CWCT 0000019. I'm so sorry, I've just given you a wrong reference. This is a CWCT guidance. This is the CWCT guidance, and it's dated March 2011. This is Technical Note 73, which would be one of the pieces of guidance issued by CWCT referred to at paragraph 220 we've just looked at. Were you familiar with this document, do you think, at the time you were involved in developing the specification?
No.
No. So if I were to ask you detailed questions about its contents, would you be able to help me?
Don't know.
Right.
Probably not. If
Okay.
I wasn't, and I'm not familiar with it.
All right. Well, not the guidance. Let's look then at the standard, please. This is at CWCT 00000046. And this is the first page of it, and you can see Part 6, Fire Performance, on the first page. Just looking at this document on the screen, does it look familiar to you?
No.
Let me just ask you one or two questions then about its contents, bearing in mind that it wasn't familiar to you at the time. But I want to know whether the principles in it were familiar to you. Can I ask you please to go to page 11 of this document and look at paragraph 6.3. Under paragraph 6.3, fire resistance, I just want to ask you this about the blue italics at the bottom. Now, just to be clear, this is the standard, and the words in ordinary writing in black are the standard, and the blue italics are commentary, just so you're clear about that. And the second paragraph from the bottom of page 11 says, aluminium envelope systems do not normally have significant resistance to fire. Most unmodified aluminium building envelopes will provide only 10 to 20 minutes stability and integrity resistance and negligible insulation resistance. Were you aware of that as a principle or observation at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell project?
No.
No. Can I ask you to be shown, please, page 15 of the same document? This is paragraph 6.6.1 under materials, and 6.6.1 refers to materials in rain screen cavities. And again, if you look at if you look at the words this time, we'll look at the blue italics in a moment. It says, the cavity behind a rain screen and in front of the air barrier should not include materials which can significantly promote flame spread within the unseen cavity. In general, this zone may contain a timber, aluminium or other metal vertical framework and insulation of appropriate resistance to combustion. You see that?
Yes.
Okay, and then it goes on, that's the background, to look at and we can look at the blue italics together. The use of any combustible material for the supporting framework and insulation, and those are important words, and insulation within the cavity may need to be considered as the building height increases. Were you aware of that as a general principle at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell project?
No, sorry.
And if you look at the next paragraph itself, 6.6.2, insulation materials, insulation in walls of buildings with a story more than 18 metres above ground level should be of limited combustibility. Were you aware of that as a general principle at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project?
I don't recall I was.
Right. We looked at paragraph 12.7 of ADB earlier on this morning, Mr. Rek, in your evidence, which referred to materials of limited combustibility. Can I just be clear then? Were you aware at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project of the concept of materials of limited combustibility?
I don't recall. I know my awareness came later in my professional career.
Right.
I don't know whether I acquired that knowledge prior to Grenfell project.
I see. So would it follow from that answer that you were not aware of the definition of what would constitute a material of limited combustibility? Right. Would you say, having looked at a little bit of this standard, and there's plenty more we could look at, that before drafting the elements of the NBS specification dealing with the rain screen system, H92, it would have been important for you to familiarise yourself with the relevant requirements of both the building regulations and the approved guidance?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Would you agree with me that, well, now that we've looked at a little bit of the CWCT standard, that before drafting the elements of the NBS specification relating to the rain screen cladding under Part H92, it would have been important for you to familiarise yourself with the requirements of the building regulations and the approved guidance, or approved document B, to be more precise?
I mean, retrospectively looking at it, I think it would help if I had a better understanding. Of course, it's a lesson learned. But we had a fire consultant on the job, and I considered fire-related issues quite a complicated subject outside of my competence.
You say we had a fire consultant on the job. Who was that?
It would be Exova.
Did Exova play any part in helping you formulate the contents of the NBS specification?
I couldn't recall at the time, but I now have evidence that I was in contact with Terry Ashton with regards to cavity barriers.
Apart from your discussion with Terry Ashton about cavity barriers, the question was a bit of a broader one. Do you recall Exova having any input into the choice of materials or choice of guidance, such as the CWCT, in the NBS specification?
Not to my knowledge. I don't recall.
If you could look at page 12, please, of the CWCT guidance while we're on it. You can see it's quite a long chunk of blue italic text on that page, but 4 paragraphs down it says ADB provides guidance on the fire resistance requirements for external walls. Did you yourself check ADB fire resistance requirements for the external walls when building this specification up?
Don't recall that.
Okay. Is there a reason why you might not have done?
I mean, I believe I assumed that the design of the cladding and the materials involved had been considered before my engagement, and some of the choices of materials I inherited. Some of them appeared in the Stage D report I read. Can you repeat the question? I forgot.
Well, let me take it slightly differently then.
Yeah.
If you look at the words I've just shown you on the page, it says ADB provides guidance on the fire resistance requirements for external walls. Did you know that the CWCT guidance itself contains a link to ADB in that, at least in that respect, and tells you where to look if you want guidance on the fire resistance requirements for external walls?
No, because I wouldn't have read this document.
Okay. And but the question I then asked you was whether you checked the ADB fire resistance requirements for external walls when you were developing the specification.
I don't recall doing that.
Right. We're now going to turn to a different topic, and Mr. Chairman, this will take us beyond the break, but we can start it certainly.
It probably would be good to do another 10 minutes or so.
Certainly.
Are you all right for another 10 minutes or so, Mr. Rek?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, then we'll have a reasonable break.
Yeah,
All right,
fine.
thank you.
Very good. I'm going to turn to the topic of ACM, specifying the ACM, the aluminium composite. Prior to your involvement on Grenfell, had you actually ever used or specified a composite panel such as ACM for use as a rain screen element?
I don't think I did.
No. What about for any other purpose? Have you ever prescribed an ACM panel for any purpose?
No, just going through my previous projects. Don't think I did.
Were you aware that composite panels, whether aluminium or indeed zinc for that matter, could come with different kinds of core? For example, fire-resistant core.
Again, I don't recall whether I was aware of it at the time.
Okay. Is that something you came to learn later?
Yes.
I see. Later on a project or later as a result of the Grenfell Tower fire?
It was on a different project prior to the fire.
So, right. Was that the Bromley South?
Yes.
That's the one. Did you, at the time, understand, at the time of Grenfell, understand how a cladding panel with a polyethylene core might behave in a fire?
Sorry, I lost the beginning of the question.
Yes. At the time of the Grenfell Tower project, did you have any understanding of how a cladding panel with a polyethylene core might behave in a fire?
No.
Were you aware at all at that time that that composite rain screen panels such as ACM could contribute to external flame spread?
No.
Did you know what polyethylene actually was?
Some sort of plastic.
Some sort of plastic. Did you think positively about how that some sort of plastic might contribute to the spread of fire?
No.
At the time of your working on the Grenfell project, were you aware of previous fires involving external cladding facades on high-rise residential buildings, such as, for example, Knowsley Heights in Liverpool in 1991?
No, I wasn't.
What about Garnet Court in Irvine in 1999?
No.
No. The fire at Lakenal House in Southwark in London in 2009?
No.
No.
I learned about this much later
Right.
after the inquiry started.
Were you aware of the spate of fires in high-rise buildings in the UAE in 2012 to 2013?
No.
No. And what about the well-publicised fires in Dubai at the Address or the Torch in 2015? I know that's after your time on the Grenfell Tower project.
Neither that one.
Really? Okay. Can we then turn to the process of selection of the ACM panels? Can I ask you to go back, please, to your statement at SEA 0001427 and go to page 8, please. And I'd like you to look at paragraph 25.1, and you say there, from what I can recall, polyethylene core composite panels had already been considered for the cladding for the project before my involvement on the project. And I do not think my inquiry about these types of panel was the first time that they were considered. Then you go on to consider some drawings. We'll come to look at that in detail. Are you saying here that you saw those drawings you refer to at the time and concluded from them at the time that PE composite panels had already been considered?
I saw those drawings. That was part of the documents I studied before I started working on the specification and developing the drawings.
I see. So just to be very clear, you're not relying on those drawings now as evidence to support your belief that at the time...
No.
Okay. Can I ask you to look at SEA 00001586? And this is the first of the two drawings you refer to in paragraph 25.1 as those you looked at the time. If you look at this drawing, which is the Studio E drawing of September 2012, so before your involvement,
yes.
At the top right-hand corner of the drawing, you can see it says composite zinc panel, and then I think it says pigmento green, yes?
Yes.
And that's on the spandrels. You can also see composite zinc panels on the columns on the right-hand side lower down and at the bottom of the drawing.
Yes.
Yeah,
I can see that. Yeah.
You can see it there. Do you... this was one of the drawings that you looked at, you say, at the time, to support your view or knowledge that ACM had already been selected. Do you accept that looking at that drawing, there is no reference there to polyethylene core?
Correct.
Or indeed aluminium composite?
Yeah.
Were there, to your knowledge, zinc composite panels on the market that did not have a polyethylene core?
Don't know.
How did this drawing, when you looked at it at the time, lead you to think that ACM had already been considered?
Well, I might have mixed up zinc and aluminium, but what I meant, composite cladding materials with the metal sheets on them were considered before my involvement.
Right. So you might have mixed up zinc with aluminium. That's quite a mix-up, isn't it? My question really is, how could you confuse zinc for aluminium if, as you say in your statement, you thought ACM, aluminium, had already been specified before you came into the project by reference to these pre-existing drawings?
I mean, sometimes you use these abbreviations like ACM. Too often you forget what A stands for. You just know it's a metal. And yeah, ACM is aluminium, and I probably made a mistake there.
Right. But there's no reference in this drawing to polyethylene as part of, or as the material in the core composite, is there?
No.
So my question really is, how could this drawing have led you to think that polyethylene core composite panels were prepared in drawings before you became involved in the project?
I think I took the word composite zinc panel or composite metal panel as containing that plastic core, because I guess that's what we had samples of in the office, and I was just familiar with the product, how it looked.
If you look then at the second of the two drawings that you refer to at paragraph 25.1 of your statement, this is SEA 00002135. And again, if you look at the top right-hand corner, you can see that it says composite zinc column cladding, notched, tapered to match. You see that? And then three up from the bottom on the right-hand side, composite zinc column cladding quartz. and composite zinc spandrel panel, quartz. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Again, there's no reference in there to polyethylene. So my same question again. How did those drawings, which don't refer to polyethylene, tell you that polyethylene core composite panels had already become involved before you got into the project?
I think the inclusion of the word polyethylene in my statement came in from my knowledge at the time when I was providing the statement.
I see.
Because I've read so much about it, I probably mixed up.
I follow. So, just to be clear, would you agree that it's wrong to say that either of these drawings show that a panel with a polyethylene core had been considered?
Yeah, they don't show explicitly polyethylene. But I don't know whether the quartz product was, I can't remember whether it was a product which then, if you looked it up, would tell you it had a polyethylene. I don't know.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, just one or two more questions on this, and then we can break.
Yes, all right.
Did anybody at Studio E tell you that that the composite zinc panels on these drawings were polyethylene? Had a polyethylene core.
I don't recall explicitly hearing word polyethylene.
Right.
No.
So does that mean that when you were involved in the project, developing the NBS specification, you knew that the panels were a composite, but didn't know what material the core was?
Having the sample in my hands, I knew it was some sort of plastic, but
But you didn't investigate further?
don't think I did.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment for a break?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Rek, we'll have a break now.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you please not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're out of the room.
Yes.
We're only having one break this morning, so I think we can be a little bit more generous to you than if we were having two. So I'm going to say, please be back to resume at 25 to 12. All right?
Okay.
Right. Would you like to go with the usher then?
Yes.
Good. 25 to 12, please. Would you ask Mr. Rek to come back in, please? All right, ready to carry on, Mr. Rek?
Yes, I am.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Rek, can I start by going back over a question and answer that we had this morning together, where I might have been, in fact, I probably was a bit unfair to you, and I just want to set the record straight on that. You don't need to be shown this, but for the record, it's page 47, sorry, page 47 at lines 9 and 10, and the answer at 15 to 20. And I put to you that ACM, aluminium composite, had already been specified. And when we were looking at the drawings, which showed zinc, and in fact, to be fair to you, your paragraph 25.1 doesn't say that aluminium polyethylene composite panels had been specified, only PE. So your answers in respect of that, the mix-up potentially between zinc and aluminium, I think are founded on my misreading of your witness statement.
Okay.
Just
Thank you
to
for
be
that.
clear about that.
Thanks.
Now, moving on, can I ask you please to look at SEA 000142778 at page 9. This is paragraph 25.2 of your statement. Let's just look at that together. I don't know what
We're looking at...
this is. It should be page 9 of your statement. SEA 000142778 at page 9. That's it. Paragraph 25.2, you say, I do not recall discussing the fire rating or fire performance of polyethylene-based composite panels while I worked on the project. I also do not recall discussing whether these panels came with fire retardant cores or whether any investigation on compliance with Part B of the Building Regulations 2010 building regulations had taken place. I may have assumed that compliance with building regulations had already been confirmed prior to my involvement, since I'd simply been asked to obtain samples of these materials, and the focus appeared to be on the appearance and cost of the product. Now, I just want to examine that paragraph with you and break it down into bits, if I can. First, you say you don't recall discussing the fire rating or performance of PE composite panels. So there was no, do I take it that there was no discussion at all with Mr. Sounes or anybody else at Studio E on that topic that you had?
Not to my knowledge or recollection.
And you also say that you didn't recall discussing whether the panels came with fire retardant cores. Again, can I take it that it didn't occur to you or anybody else at Studio E, to your knowledge, to investigate whether there was a fire-resistant or retardant core available?
I don't recall that.
And you say you don't recall whether compliance with Part B of the building regulations had been confirmed prior to your involvement. Did you discuss that with anybody at all? Do you remember?
Whether compliance with Part B
Yes.
had been confirmed prior to my involvement?
Yes.
No, I don't recall discussing that.
You go on to say, I may have assumed that compliance with building regulations had already been confirmed prior to my involvement. Do you remember on what basis you made that assumption, or may have made that assumption?
Well, since there had been some research done on the materials before my involvement, and when I was briefed by Bruce, he mentioned composite cladding materials. He was talking about zinc. There was a fire strategy report written, and I was fairly new to the project, a project which had been running for I don't know how long, from 2012, and yeah.
Yeah. Just looking at that answer, following that up, you say, when I was briefed by Bruce, he mentioned composite cladding materials. Did he mention them in the context of fire safety?
No.
What did he tell you, if you can recall, about the composite cladding materials?
I mean, as I remember, back then the focus was on rigidness of the cladding material, given that it was going to be mounted on in a height with a lot of wind exposure and in fairly large panels.
You say also in that last answer but one that there had been some research done on the materials before your involvement. What was that research, do you know?
What was the research? I
Yes.
don't know. I haven't done that research, but Bruce gave me indication what materials had been considered, and he told me which one to look at and which samples to obtain. And he also mentioned liaison with planners, and that the cladding material evolved from like vividly colored HPL panels to zinc. Yeah.
Did Bruce Sounes tell you that research had been done on the ACM panels that were being selected?
It's difficult to use the word research, I guess.
Well, you used the word, so I'm just exploring it with you.
Yeah.
Mr. Rek.
Research to what extent is a question I don't know an answer to. But he would have selected potential materials which he would discuss, I guess, with the client and the planners.
Right. In general terms, would you expect compliance to have been investigated prior to Stage D or at Stage D or in the Stage D report?
I don't know.
No? Was there a project file that you could check if you wanted to see whether building regulation compliance had been considered in relation to the ACM?
Not that I recall. No.
If ACM had been considered and its fire safety the subject of discussion or consideration within Studio E, where would you expect to see those considerations or deliberations recorded?
Recorded. Might have been a report of a design review. I don't know.
Do you remember ever seeing a report of the design review during your few months of involvement on this project?
No, I think I recall only reading the Stage D report.
Right. Okay. Now, you say lower down the paragraph that you were simply asked to obtain samples of these materials. You see that?
Yes.
Do you mean PE core composite materials?
As well, yes.
Yes. And who asked you to obtain those samples?
Bruce.
Bruce. And at what stage of your involvement? Was that early on or partway through?
I think it was quite early on.
And if you go back, please, a page or two to page 6 of your statement and look at paragraph 18 with me, please. You can see, this is the top of page 6, you can see that you say there, I understood from Bruce that the client, KCTMO, wanted to include options in the tender for aluminium composite material, ACM, cladding, so we also require tenderers to provide for alternative ACM materials, Rhenobond, Alucobond, and quartz zinc. And then you refer to the NBS spec from page 63. Who was it, do you remember, that identified Rhenobond as one of the alternative materials?
I don't know who identified it, but I got the knowledge through Bruce.
You got the knowledge through Bruce, okay. Now, you referred a minute ago to an Exova report, I think. Do you remember receiving a draft of the Exova outline fire safety strategy in early November 2013?
I'm not sure. I don't recall. I don't know.
Okay. Now, do you remember reading in the Stage D report, when you were reading into the project, seeing an issue, a version of the Exova outline fire strategy?
Yeah, that would be part of it.
You did. Can I then take you to a document, SEA 00009716, at page 3, please? This is an email, should be an email, right. Yeah. If you look at the bottom of that page, and this is one of those, I'm afraid, which splits over 2 pages, but if you look at the bottom of that page and onto page 4, here is an email from Terry Ashton at Exova on the 5th of November to you, copied to Mr. Sounes, yes?
Yes.
And if you flip, or are flipped to page 4, please, it says, Thomas Bruce, further to Bruce's earlier email, I've revised the report, see draft with changes highlighted in yellow attached, and have annotated copies of the drawings with the necessary fire ratings using your colour scheme, see attached. Hopefully we should be able to finalise both within the timescale Bruce identified. Now, I just want to ask you about the timing of that. As we see, 5th November 2013. Was that before or after, do you think, you had entered the specification for polyethylene cord ACM panels on the NBS spec?
I guess this would happen after.
When you
That
say
this email would, I believe. Because I would start working on the NBS specification fairly from the outset of my involvement.
So September time?
I believe so.
Yes, I see. Okay. Were you ever asked to send Exova details of the cladding panels, particularly the alternative cladding panels of Rhenobond, ACM PE core, to Exova?
No.
Were you aware of whether Exova knew or didn't know of what was being specified for the material for the proposed rain screen for Grenfell?
But I knew.
No, whether Exova knew.
Well, I didn't know what it knew. Yeah.
So you, just to be clear, you didn't know whether Exova knew or didn't know about what was proposed for rain screen?
Correct.
Okay. Now, go to paragraph 30 of your statement, please, at page 10 of SEA 00014278. And you say there, towards the bottom of the page, you say, as I've stated above, I cannot recall discussing the fire rating or fire performance of any of the cladding panels that I investigated and sourced from suppliers and manufacturers while I worked on the project. You see that?
Yes.
And you refer in your statement from paragraph 26 onwards, from page 9, to a series of contacts with different cladding panel suppliers or distributors in order to obtain quotes. In general terms, can we take it that your focus at that time was on cost and appearance?
Yes.
And you also say, and I'll take this quickly, paragraphs 37 and 38 of your statement, that you asked suppliers questions about fixing methods due to the impact that the fixing method may have on the speed of installation and the cost.
Yes.
Yes. Did you ever ask any of the suppliers whether the fixing method would affect its fire performance?
I don't believe I did.
Did you ever ask suppliers about the fire performance of any of the panels that you were investigating with them?
I don't believe I did.
Did you ever, I suppose it would follow, you didn't check with them whether the panels that you were considering achieved Class 0 or the European equivalent,
Don't recall
so-called
that.
equivalent? Now, go back to your statement, please, at paragraph 26. This is where you deal with a meeting. If we can just get back to that, it's on page 9. You say, on the 27th of September 2013, I attended a meeting with Bruce Sounes, Studio E, Mark Harris, commercial manager at Harley, and Ray Bailey, managing director of Harley, at a coffee shop or restaurant at Hayes Galleria near London Bridge Station, which Bruce had arranged to discuss the cladding specification. And this meeting, Mr. Rek, will come up again in the evidence of you and other witnesses, but we call this the Hayes Galleria meeting. Can we just look at well, you say there that you arranged to discuss the cladding specification. If we go on to paragraph 29 of your statement, you say, we just see it in the middle of page 10, I cannot recall the details of the discussion, and I did not take a note of the meeting. If I received any hard copy material at the meeting, it's probably lost. I cannot recall whether or not we discussed the suitability of PIR, polyisocyanurate, or rigid foam. And then you go on to say, in the next paragraph, in the second sentence, however, I've reviewed my email correspondence at the time, and it's clear that we must have discussed the different types of cladding at the meeting with Harley, although I think it was more to do with the appearance and price of the various materials and not their fire performance or rating. You see that?
Yes.
That's paragraph 30 at the end. Now, does that include at the meeting? You didn't discuss fire rating or fire performance of any of the cladding panels that you'd investigated at the Hayes Galleria meeting?
I don't recall that.
Right. Now, at that stage of the design, selection of materials to include within the NBS specification, would you normally ask a specialist subcontractor about what materials should be put in?
I don't know an answer to that.
Okay, well, maybe it wasn't a brilliant question.
No.
Let me try it a different way. As at the date of the Hayes Galleria meeting, 27th of September 2013, and given the state of the specification at that point, was it at that time, or at that point, your normal practice to involve specialist subcontractors in the decision about what materials to put in to an NBS specification such as this?
I'm not sure I can answer that because for me, this kind of meeting was new. I never had previous dealings with specialist subcontractors helping out on developing the design.
Right. So this was a meeting such as the Hayes Galleria meeting was a novel experience for you as an architect.
Yes.
Right. Did you ask Mr. Sounes, given that it was a novel experience, why you were having it before you went to it?
I wouldn't question the reasons. I think my assumption was to check the buildability with the specialist subcontractor and what their standard offer would be.
Right.
What is achievable for a given price?
You say check the buildability. What do you mean by that?
Again, taking it back to the price check, what sort of panels, what sort of fixing method we can expect within the budget we have.
I see. So this was essentially a budget issue. Is that fair, or were there other things?
As I said, I really don't recall, and I regret not being able to recall any conversation. But
All right.
I guess.
Let's look on at let's look on at some emails. Before I do that, just before we leave the Hayes Galleria meeting, although we may have to come back to it, did you form any impression at that meeting that Harley had a preference for ACM as the material for use on the rain screen?
I don't know whether it was a preference. It was definitely within their portfolio of projects they worked on. Whether they advocated it as a preference, I don't recall.
No, I appreciate it's a long time ago, and I'm asking you an impressionistic question. Let me try another one. Did you form the impression at that meeting, so far as you can recall, that Harley had a particular preference for a particular manufacturer of ACM?
Don't recall that.
Okay. Can I then take you to SEA 00009240? This is an email of the 18th of October 2013 from you to Paul Cousins, copied to Bruce Sounes and Paddy Glennon. And Paul Cousins was at, well, do you remember?
SIG.
SIG, yeah, exactly. And you say to him in that email, "Hi Paul, referring back to our phone call today, can you please provide quotation for supply of the Zinc Nova composite panels in line with our design intent drawings issued previously? We are under pressure from the client regarding the costs, with suggestions flagged of using aluminium. We and the planners would much rather see zinc up there. I'll be expecting your quote by Tuesday next week, as discussed." Is the reference to the planners there to the RBKC planning department?
I believe so.
Did you get the feeling that Studio E was under some kind of pressure to specify cheaper ACM material instead of zinc?
From the client? Yes.
Yes. What gave you that impression?
Bruce relaying the fact that those ACM alternatives were to be included in the specification.
And I think it's right, though, that, as we may see, that you continue to pursue zinc as an option.
Yes.
Can I ask you to go to paragraph 59 of your statement, please, page 16, SEA 000014278, page 16. And you say, there, Simon Walker at SIG responded, and you say that they'd made contact with Mark Harris, he's Harley, and would provide budgets to Harley the following week for the rain screen cladding. You see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So ultimately, you put SIG in touch with Harley so that you could get a price, essentially, for both supply and installation of the rain screen, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, can I ask you to move on then to SEA 00007, I'm sorry, 00009736. This is an email to you from Mark Harris on the 7th of November 2013 with a quote for the Proteus HR panel. You see that? And then he starts, "Good morning, Thomas. A response has been received at last from KME." And do you remember who KME were?
It was the provider of that panel.
Yes. And you see the quote below it, Proteus HR composite, £282 per square metre. And Mr. Harris says, "Quite what this finish is based on, I have no idea due to lack of information." And then he says this, "I have to say, from a Harley selfish point of view, our preference would be to use ACM. It's tried and tested on many Harley projects, and we are confident in the cost base. That said, we are, of course, an envelope contractor and would be happy to clad the building in the material of choice." You see that?
Yes.
What did you understand when you received this email that Mark Harris meant when he said from a Harley selfish point of view?
I think they just had a frustrated experience in dealings with KME on providing the costs.
Right. You say that. Was
And-
that based on any discussion or any other communication you had with Mr. Harris or anybody else at Harley? Or is it based on this email?
Well, I was part to an email chain, or more emails than just this, I believe, where we were chasing KME for the costs.
Did you ask Mr. Harris what he meant when he said, from a Harley selfish point of view, our preference would be to use ACM?
I don't remember asking him.
Did this expression of Harley's selfish point of view and their preference influence, so far as you are concerned, the decision to include ACM as an alternative in the NBS specification?
It didn't influence my decision.
Right. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 65, please, on page 17 of your statement? You set out there your recollection about other projects, and you say in the fourth line down, "I do, however, seem to recall that Harley had mentioned another high-rise tower project that they'd carried out at a development called Ferrier Point in Canning Town, at which they had used ACM cladding. ACM cladding was widely used in the industry at the time, i.e. in 2013, and my understanding was that architects and the building industry more generally appeared to be content with its suitability for buildings over 18 metres in height." Now, just a number of questions about that. Do you remember in what context Harley mentioned the Ferrier Point project?
When they were showing their portfolio?
Was that at the Hayes Galleria meeting or another time?
Yes.
Yes. Do you know, or do you remember who mentioned the Ferrier Point project?
One of them. I don't know who.
You don't know. Were you given any details of the Ferrier Point project?
I don't recall, but yeah, they would mention the material used.
Right. Did they tell you that aluminium composite with a PE core was used on that project?
Don't recall that.
Did the fact that they'd mentioned it affect your thinking about the suitability of ACM panels for the Grenfell Tower project?
But I showed more than just this project. Some of them were high-rise buildings clad with this sort of material
Right.
or product.
So they showed you other projects as well,
Yes.
but you recall the Ferrier Point project. Do you recall any others specifically that they showed you?
No. I just remember the image, seeing it again.
Right. To come back to my question, did the fact that they had mentioned the use of ACM on the Ferrier Point project affect your thinking about the suitability of ACM panels for use on the Grenfell Tower project?
I believe it did, yeah.
In what way?
It's a tried material which has been used, installed on many buildings.
Yes. Now, you go on to say that the ACM cladding was widely used in the industry at the time, 2013, as we've seen in your paragraph 65, and I've just read that to you. How did you know that ACM was widely used in the industry at the time?
Just general knowledge, seeing it around.
Right. And you say that your understanding, and this is paragraph 65, your understanding was that architects and the building industry more generally appeared to be content with its suitability. By architects, are you including Studio E in that?
Yeah, I think my statement is quite general.
Okay, so you mean the architect's profession, do you, rather than
Yeah,
specific
it's
architects?
my personal opinion.
Right. Did you have any, or do you have any recollection of having any thinking at the time as to whether Studio E, as an architect itself, was content with the use of ACM?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Well, let me try getting at it a different way. At the time, what experience, to your knowledge, did Studio E have of the use of ACM in an overcladding project?
I don't know specifically.
Do you know how you came to the understanding that architects generally appeared to be content with the suitability of ACM over 18 metres?
Just seeing the evidence of being installed.
Or on other projects?
Yes.
Would you agree with the general proposition that the fact that a product is widely used provides no indication of its suitability for any individual project?
Correct.
And would you also agree that it's for the design team to establish the suitability of the material for each project as it arises?
Yes.
Yes. And that it would be wrong to assume the suitability of a product purely based on its wide use or its popularity?
Yes.
Do you know the reason why Studio E specified the Proteus HR panel in the NBS specification and ACM as one of the alternatives?
The Proteus was the preferred option.
Yes.
And then I remember quite late, there was the request of including the ACM materials in the specification as well.
Indeed. My question was why, do you know why Studio E specified the Proteus HR as the preferred option?
I think back then it would be probably based just on the aesthetics.
I see. If you can turn the page, please, in your statement to page 18 and go to paragraph 69 of your statement. You say there that you do not recall discussing do not recall us discussing the Reynobond and Alucobond products. You see that?
Yes.
And you go on to say, or which type of ACM core we should use, i.e. polyethylene, PE, fire-resistant FR, or A2, i.e. a non-combustible core, while I worked on the project. See that? And then you go on to say, we, and I emphasize the word we, included Reynobond and Alucobond as alternative cladding materials in the NBS specification, but I cannot recall exactly how this decision was made. I think it may have been made before I became involved in the project, or following Bruce's conversation with the planner, as referred to at paragraph 67 above. Now, when you say we included Reynobond in the third line of that paragraph, as you do, who did you mean by we?
Me and Bruce, or like the team at Studio E?
Right. Do you think it was your decision backed up by Bruce, or was it Bruce's decision backed up by you? Who made the primary decision here?
It would come to me from Bruce.
Do you remember Bruce telling you, or in some way communicating with you, the
Yes.
decision? When was that, do you think?
I really do not recall.
Right. Can we next turn to the NBS specification and look at it, where we'll see the specification of the cladding panels in that document. So that's where we're going, Mr. Rek. Page 65. This is SEA 000000169, page 65. And you can see that at 65 we have types of rain screen cladding at the top of the page, and this is within H92, which you can see from the bottom of the page. At the top we get paragraph 120, and then if you turn the page to 123, to page 66, you can see 123. You see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you can see there that Proteus HR honeycomb rain screen panel has been specified. Who actually inputted the data into the NBS specification so that the Proteus HR honeycomb would appear?
I believe that would have been me.
Do you agree with me that that is an example of a proprietary specification in this part of the NBS? In other words, specification of a particular product by name?
Yes.
Yes. And that the contractor is required to supply and install Proteus HR, subject only to the discretion to propose similar or equal products?
Yes.
Yes. And just to make that good, can I ask you to go back to page 64, please, and look at the top of the page, just to make sure you've got those words clearly in front of you. We probably need to go to the bottom of page 6. No, that's all right. 64, to be read with preliminaries, general conditions. And you can see it says, notwithstanding the description of workmanship described in various parts of this NBS, NES, the contents, etc. And then, second bullet point, the manufacturers noted within the specification are indicative and may be substituted with similar or equal alternatives. So that was clear to you, was it? That
Yes.
the contractor was required, if they were going to deviate from Proteus HR, only to propose similar or equal products.
Correct.
Yes. Can you explain why that approach was adopted in the NBS specification?
Well, I believe there are two aspects to it. One, the decision on the specific materials hasn't been reached together with the planners and the client. And second, the specialist subcontractor would be developing the detailed design, and they might have some objections to the selected materials, and they should have the freedom to suggest alternative.
Why
So
would
it's,
Harley, as the specialist, well, why would any specialist subcontractor, because it wouldn't necessarily be Harley at that stage, of course, why would any specialist subcontractor object to the use of Proteus HR honeycomb as the rain screen material?
Could be on several grounds: complexity of buildability, cost, availability.
Did the flexibility that you were building into the NBS specification by the ability for the subcontractor to propose alternative materials, did that flexibility extend to anything other than aesthetics or cost?
Yes, I believe so.
What?
And any concern they might have, I wouldn't foresee.
Okay. Can I ask you to go to page 64, please, of your statement, and look at paragraph 64 of the SE of this NBS spec, SEA 0000169, page 64, and paragraph 11. So we're still on it. Information to be provided with tender. You can see that it says there, in addition to the cladding specified in the below clauses 120 and 123, submit comparative supply and install costs per square metre of the whole cladding system for the following alternative materials. And then there are three set out. There's Rainabond Duragloss 5000 with three different finishes, a Luca Bond, which is Spectra Secura 917, and then zinc, quartz zinc composite polymer panel by VM Zinc. Note, face fastened solutions permitted. You see that?
Yes.
So the requirement there was to provide quotations, yes?
Yes.
Did you draft that in there, do you think?
Yeah, would be me typing it in. Yeah.
Is it your understanding that, as drafted, this wasn't supposed to entitle the contractor to choose those products, that the contractor had to use Proteus HR or a similar or equal alternative?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Well, was it your understanding that, as it was drafted, this didn't entitle the contractor to choose those products just if it wanted to? It would have to provide a quotation, but had to use Proteus HR as a prescribed product, or any product that was similar or equal as an alternative?
Yes, that would be my understanding.
Yes. Now, we don't see any explanation in the NBS specification of what similar or equal as an alternative is. Why is there no definition of that phrase?
That's a good question I don't have an answer for.
Okay. Similar or equal in what respects did you intend?
All different aspects of performance of the material. But yeah, it's probably not clearly defined.
So I see. Did Studio E consider that Rainabond or Alucobond, the two out of the three materials we see in paragraph 11 on page 64 there, were products which were similar or equal as alternatives to Proteus HR?
I don't know.
You don't know. Did you ever go through the thought processes of how it could be that you would be saying Proteus HR or something that's similar or equal, but also ask for quotations of Rainabond and Alucobond?
I remember being tasked with putting this clause in exact this wording. It wasn't my decision on the wording.
Would you agree that Studio E, by using this wording under 11, had given the contractor a choice to use a product that was perhaps visually similar to Proteus HR, Honeycomb, but actually might be a less safe product in terms of fire performance?
I guess the focus was on visual aspect and costs, obviously.
Can I ask you to just focus on clause 11 for the moment? And we can see the alternative product, Reynobond Duragloss 5000, and then the three different options. I showed you those before a moment ago, but I just want to focus in a little bit more detail on the first bullet point. Metallic, standard, and non-standard satin gloss. What did standard and non-standard mean or denote?
I don't know.
You don't know? Can I just be clear? It was you who put this into the NBS spec, wasn't it?
Well, we put it in there together with Bruce, and I don't know whether I received a list which I was supposed to include. I don't know whether the selection of the materials, where it originated.
Right. So you can't help us identify where standard and non-standard comes from. Is that what you're saying?
I can't recall looking at it now. No.
Right. Okay. Can I then take you to a document INQ 000113336? What this is, I'll just explain when we see it. INQ 000113336. This is a list of manufacturers of rain screen cladding panels, which was available on the NBS Plus product database as at November 2013. Do you know what I'm talking about when I refer to the NBS Plus product database?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Just have a look at that list, if you would. It is actually the first of two pages I want to show you, but this is the first page. If you look down it, you can see that there is a list of logos of a manufacturers, and then the manufacturers identified, and then the products that they make. You see that?
Yes.
And we can cast our eye down there, and then we can look at the next one. Just on this one, do you agree that there's no reference to Reynobond or Alucobond, or indeed Proteus HR in that list?
No, I can't see it. No.
No. Can I ask you then to look at the second page of the list, or second list, INQ 000113345. And you can see again, this is a list of products. It comes from the same source, the NBS Plus product database as of November 2013. And looking down that list again, do you agree? Again, there's no reference there to Reynobond, Alucobond, or Proteus HR.
Yeah, I can't see it.
No, I mean there is a reference there to VM Zinc at the very bottom of that page. You see that?
Yes.
Yes, and you can see VMZ or Z composite. Do you remember looking at these lists at the time that you drafted paragraph 11 on page 64 of the NBS specification?
No.
You don't? Right. Did you check those lists at the time in order to make sure that what you were proposing expressly as alternatives to the Proteus HR were at least included on the manufacturers' lists?
No.
Why is that?
I was in direct contact with the manufacturer, KME, and I saw the product.
Right. And what about Reynobond, Alucobond, and what about those two, Reynobond and Alucobond?
My recollection is that I was told that these products should be included for the costing purposes.
Told by who?
By Bruce.
By Bruce. Do you remember when you were told by Bruce that you should include those products, Reynobond and Alucobond, for costing purposes?
I might be wrong, but I think the inclusion of the alternatives came into the specification quite late.
Quite late. Okay, just to be clear, quite late in
Might have
your...
been November.
Right. Okay.
But
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm going to change topic now, Mr. Rek, and go to the subject of the crown. When I say the crown, I mean the architectural feature at the head of the building.
Yes.
It's right, isn't it, that by the time Studio E got to the tender stage, which was late 2013, and then after you left, early 2014, but at the time you left, no detailed design work had been carried out on the crown.
Yeah, not to my recollection. I remember working on alternatives. Yeah.
Well, let's look at the NBS specification. If you can go to SEA 000000169 and turn to page 67, please. And just to focus on the date of this document as we did before, this is 30th of January 2014, so this is after you left. And at the bottom of page 67, you can see it says, at paragraph 130, major non-standard components, crown, manufacturer TBC, product reference TBC, material TBC, finish TBC, fixing as recommended by panel manufacturer to suit environmental conditions, and there are some details under that. And we can see what the last bullet point. Other requirements include products, fixing, interfaces necessary to complete the fabrication and installation. You see that?
Yes.
It's right then, isn't it, that in effect questions about the design, the material, the finish, the fixing were all left over until after the NBS specification had been completed and sent out to tenderers?
Yeah, that's the manifestation.
Right. Now, if we look at an earlier version of the NBS specification, this is SEA 000000152. This is the version dated the 21st of November 2013, which you get from the very top of page 2. If I could just ask you to be shown that, thank you. You can see that. So this is at a time of your involvement in the development of the specification. And just to orientate you in the chronology, this was the draft that was the draft before the 29th of November version, a week later or so, which was eventually issued to tenderers. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, do you remember who was sent this first draft of the NBS specification?
I do not recall.
Can I ask you to look at page 81, please, in the first draft of the NBS specification? And I want you to look at paragraph 130 when we get to it. It says major non-standard components, crown. You see that?
Yes.
Now, it looks, if we just look at it together, as if VM Zinc had been specified as the manufacturer and a specific product there, VM Zinc composite, a material, 2 sheets of zinc, 0.5 millimeter thick, thermo-glued on either side of a mineral-rich polyethylene core. See that?
Yes.
And thickness 4 millimeters, finished quartz zinc pre-weathered. Did you draft that detail, do you remember, into this earlier version of the NBS specification?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Well, who else would it have been at this stage, third week of November, if not you, Mr. Rek?
Might have been whoever was working on that NBS specification before me.
Oh, I see. So are you saying that it's possible, but don't speculate, that this was already in the draft specification before you came to it to develop it from September onwards?
I don't know.
when you came to develop the NBS specification, did you look at this part of it under the Crown, paragraph 130?
Sure.
Did you appreciate at that time, and perhaps even this time, 21st of November 2013, that it contained a reference to a mineral-rich PE core?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yes. Did it ring a bell with you at the time?
I can't recollect.
Do you have a recollection of what mineral-rich might have meant to you?
Well, some sort of additive to, to the polyethylene core. Probably something to do with better fire performance.
Right.
But I don't know whether that's my assumption now, or my knowledge now, or whether
Right.
I had an assumption back then.
Okay. Just to be clear, do you have a recollection of yourself proposing that the Crown should comprise a material which had a mineral-rich, in other words, fire-retardant core?
If it was me typing it in, I probably would have taken the wording word by word from the manufacturer's website.
Do you remember, just building on that answer, and I appreciate you said probably, who would have suggested to you that in the Crown you should be using a panel which had a mineral-rich polyethylene core? Or was it something you came up with yourself?
I seriously don't recall.
No. Okay. I mean, if you can't,
No.
Mr. Rek, if you can't remember, and I do
Yeah.
appreciate this is a long
Yeah.
time ago, then you can't. I just want to explore what you do remember of that. Let's just have a look, if we can, very briefly, because this might trigger a recollection. At INQ 0001139, please. That's 0001139. This is the VMZ composite product information, which was available in the NBS Plus section of the NBS database in November 2013. Can I ask you, please, just to look at the first paragraph? VMZ composite is a multi-layered panel made up of 2 sheets of zinc that are 0.5 millimetre thick and thermoglued on either side of a 3 millimetre thick mineral-rich polyethylene core for optimum reaction to fire. It is manufactured using tested Alcoa architecture products technology. And then it says in the third paragraph in the second sentence, can be installed in cassettes, all riveted screwed down sheets. And then under advantages, 5th bullet point down, fire retardant core. You see that?
Yes.
Does that trigger a recollection? Was that something that you saw at the time when preparing the NBS specification, do you think?
It doesn't trigger recollection at all.
Now let's move on in time a week or so and look at the next version of the NBS specification. That's SEA 0000153. And I'd ask you to look at page 66, please, of that document. Sorry, I should just be clear with you. Top of page 2, we see the date again, 29th of November 2013. Looking at page 66 at the bottom, clause 130, major non-standard components, Crown. And here we see this is now been changed and is like the version we saw at the start, the version of the 30th of January. And we now see it says manufacturer TBC, product reference TBC, material TBC, finished TBC, fixing, etc. Now, as I say, we've looked at the third and final version of this document in January 2014 at this point, clause 130, and it's the same. My question is, can you explain why the VMZ product with the mineral-rich core appeared in the 21st of November 2013 version of the NBS specification under Clause 130, but by the 29th of November 2013, the contents of Clause 130 just said TBC for the Crown and left the details blank.
Well, I remember the design of the Crown went through many iterations of different proposals, mainly based on looks. We then selected a Proteus product for the main elements of the facade. And I don't know whether we considered Proteus not potentially be suitable for the Crown, and maybe didn't want to mix VM zinc product with the Proteus, and therefore left it to be confirmed. Because at the time we were not sure how the Crown was going to look like. Whether it's going to be folded panels or just flat panels.
Do you remember being involved in any discussion within Studio E about changing the specification of VM zinc with the mineral-rich core for the Crown to the blanks that we see in the 29th of November version?
I do not recall. What I've just said is my assumption
Right.
of how the events could have occurred.
Right, okay. I'm now going to turn to a different topic, which is cavity barriers. And I'm going to ask you about the design of the cavity barriers in the facade. That is something that you cover yourself in your witness statement at section G, Mr. Rek.
Yeah. Yes.
From paragraphs 30 onwards. Now, or page 30 onwards, can I just ask you, generally, were you aware of the functional requirement, B3 of the building regulations, at the time you started the design for Grenfell Tower?
I guess I was aware of its existence.
Right. Were you, in particular, aware of the guidance contained in approved document B at paragraph 9 and diagram 33 about cavity barriers?
Is that the section through the building?
It
Yeah.
is.
Okay, yeah.
Well,
I would.
if we want, we can have it up on the screen
Yeah.
if you like. But I think you say you were available.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, perhaps we ought to go to diagram 33, please. That is at CLG. 0000224, please. And if we go to page 83, well, that certainly contains some of it. If you look at page, I think it's on page 84, in fact. No, it's not. It's at page 82. I'm so sorry, we're
Yes.
moving around here. If you go to page 82, you can see the diagram that we were referring to, provisions for cavity barriers. And starting at the top of the page, the top of the diagram, closed top of cavity. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you can see that you're supposed to put a cavity barrier at the top of a cavity where it says closed top of cavity. Yes?
Yes.
Was that what you understood at the time?
I would have seen this diagram, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you actually looked at it at the time?
I can't recall.
If you also look down below closed top of cavity at compartment floor with the arrow there, you can see that you're supposed to put a cavity barrier where it's indicated. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And then also close around openings where the window is indicated.
Yes, I can see.
Yes. And if you go to paragraph 9.3, which is on page 83, you can see that the guidance says, if you just turn the page, cavity barriers should be provided to close the edges of cavities, including around openings. You see that?
Yes.
Do you agree, or did you think at the time, that the guidance was sufficiently clear to you that you needed cavity barriers around openings, as indicated on diagram 33?
When I read it now, it looks clear, yeah.
When you read it, if you read it at the time, was it clear to you then?
I don't recall reading or how much I read.
Right. Okay. Do you remember having the thought process at the time that windows, and specifically the windows in the cladding system at Grenfell Tower, would constitute openings in the external wall which would require cavity barriers around them?
I don't recall my thought processes.
Right. When you started your work on the design work at Grenfell, on the Grenfell Tower project, do you remember thinking about whether you needed to put cavity barriers around the windows in the proposed overcladding structure?
Don't recall.
Right. Let me try two things then on approved document B while we've got it here. Can I ask you please to look at page 96 of this document, which is 12.8 of approved document B, cavity barriers. And it says, if you just read with me, cavity barriers should be provided in accordance with section 9. And if you look at section 9, we've just looked at the start of it. Perhaps we can go back to section 9 on page 83. That's 9.3. Perhaps go back one page to 82 again, which has got diagram 33 on it. Looking at 9.1, concealed spaces or cavities in the construction of a building provide a ready route for smoke and flame spread. This is particularly so in the case of voids in, above and below the construction of a building. For example, walls, floors, ceilings and roofs. As any spread is concealed, it presents a greater danger than would a more obvious weakness in the fabric of the building. Was that a principle with which you were familiar at the time of your involvement on the design of the Grenfell Tower overcladding structure?
I don't know whether my familiarity coincided with the time of working on Grenfell.
Right. In general terms, would you agree that cavity barriers were required to prevent passage of fire within a cavity and also to inhibit fire spread into the cavity?
Whether that was my understanding back then?
Yes, exactly. That's the question.
I don't know.
Okay. Was it part of your role to consider and update the drawings to show the location of cavity barriers?
Yes.
What did you do to update the drawings to show the location of cavity barriers? Do you remember in general terms?
Well, that's a part which puzzles me because I've included cavity barriers in line with the compartment walls and floors. And I remember being told that they need to be certain fire resistance. The problem is I don't remember who told me.
Right. Can you go to page? Well, let's look at Mr. Sounes' witness statement, and he's already put this into evidence, so I can show this to you. This is SEA 000144273 at page 112, paragraph 267. And this is his recollection I'm going to show you. He says, I have no recollection of how the judgment as to the placement of cavity barriers on the typical bay drawing was arrived at. You see that? And he says, I note that cavity barriers, if you just go over the page, are not shown on the draft typical bay drawing dated 24th September 2013, which states provision of cavity fire barrier TBC, but they are present on the version dated 25th of September 2013. And then he goes on to say what he says. And says in the last part of that last sentence, I believe that the location of the cavity barriers must have been determined with specialist input. That's his recollection. Now, can I just show you what you say in your statement? If you go to paragraph 124 on page 30, that's SEA, yes, thank you, under the heading cavity barriers at part G, you say there, in the NBS specification, we specified Lamatherm cavity barriers, which were manufactured by Downer Cladding Systems Limited. I do not recall how Studio E sourced these cavity barriers, but my drawings show cavity barriers at the floor and party walls. I think I discussed cavity barriers with Harley, but they may have been included in our drawings before Harley and Studio E were in contact in autumn 2013. So that's your recollection. Do you recall discussing cavity barriers with Harley where they should go around the windows?
No, I don't recall that.
So when you say, I think I discussed cavity barriers with Harley, what?
I'm not wrong, that they were on the drawings I sent them.
Right. I see. Now, if you go then to paragraph 125, you say, I do not recall discussing the fire performance of the cavity barriers and where they should be located. Can you remember why you had to have a discussion at all with them instead of just reading and applying approved document B?
Discussion with Harley about
Yes. Or indeed with anybody?
I don't know how did I arrive to the need of investigating with someone else what sort of fire cavity barrier needed to go into the construction. But if I discussed it later at a meeting with Harley, I think back then we would just bring it to their attention that there are some, and that there's a difference between the vertical and the horizontal cavity barriers. One of them touch the back of the rainskin cladding, one of them don't, I think. But it's not my clear recollection.
And just to go back to a question before, do you recall having a discussion with Harley or indeed with anybody else about whether there should be cavity barriers around the windows?
I don't recall on Grenfell project, but I had an experience after Grenfell where discussion was held about fire cavity barriers around windows and whether they should be or shouldn't. It was on that Bromley South Central.
Okay. Can I ask you then to go to EXO 0000586? This is an email from you to Mr. Ashton on the 4th of November at the head of an email string. And I just want to look at the bottom of page 1 of that email string, where you sent him an email on the 1st of November 2013. Read Grenfell drawings in progress. Evening, Terry. Can you please confirm that the rain screen cavity barriers are to be 60 minutes FR to match the compartmentation? You see that?
Yes.
Before you sent that email, had you checked approved document B?
I don't recall specifically.
See, what I'm interested in is why you asked the question.
Yeah.
Was it not clear to you at the time that cavity barriers themselves only required 30 minutes fire resistance and 15 minutes integrity?
That would make sense, yes.
It would make sense that, well...
That
what,
I probably referred back to the approved document, but I can't recall. There must have been a conflict between what I was advised, which I don't know by whom. It might have been, actually, now looking at it, Lamatherm themselves giving me advice. I have no idea. But there must have been a conflict since I approached Terry.
a conflict between what? Do you remember?
Between the fire resistance requirement, I was told these should have, and another source which was telling me, which might have been approved document, that the fire resistance doesn't have to be that onerous.
I see. Okay. We may come to unlock that conundrum in a moment.
Okay.
So let me just see how we get on with that email then. He comes back to you on the 4th of November at 9:05. Thomas, cavity barriers need only have a 30-minute standard of fire resistance. You see that?
Yes.
And that is, in fact, what you ended up specifying in the NBS specification, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Did you record that you had taken advice from Exover on this issue anywhere on the project file?
No, and yeah, this email came to my attention quite recently, actually.
Right. Do you know why you wouldn't have recorded on the project file the fact that you had taken specialist external advice from Exover on this issue?
I don't recall exactly how did we file emails, but there might have been an omission on my side on filing this email.
Right. Where would you normally file it?
As I said, I worked in other practices, and every practice has a different filing system.
Right. But at Studio E?
Yeah, at Studio E.
Where would you have filed it? When you were at Studio E, where would you have filed this so that other people looking at the advice taken by the Studio E team would know what advice had been taken from external advisors?
By the external team or internal team within Studio E?
I'm not sure I understand the difference.
Well, if it was just, I don't know, was Bruce copied in? No.
No.
I think it would be filed on a Studio E server, so that email could be retrieved at a later.
Right. My question is a broader one. I mean, did Studio E keep a project file where you would specifically file this email so that anybody looking at it would know that Studio E had taken expert advice from an external specialist?
Any email concerned the project would be filed.
Right.
But this one obviously wasn't.
Now, we can see your question about 60 minutes. You didn't ask Mr. Ashton where cavity barriers should be located, did you? As we can see. And my question is, why is that?
I can assume I had a conversation with him over the phone before. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Do you remember, you say I assume, but I'm not necessarily putting to you that you ever did ask him, I'm just asking why you didn't in this email. Do you remember, as you sit there today, actually having a conversation with Mr. Ashton about where cavity barriers should go? at this time?
Don't recall, and that's why this email came to me as a bit of a surprise.
Okay. All right. Can I ask you then to move on to paragraph 125 of your statement, which is at page 30? You say there, I do not recall discussing the fire performance of the cavity barriers and where they should be located. And then you go on to say the name, this is 4 lines down, the name of the Lamitherm product that we specified, namely CWRSH60, suggests that it has a 60-minute fire resistance, RSV 60, but in the NBS specification, we only required 30 minutes fire resistance. 3030 to BS 476 Part 20, 1987, and BS EN 3066 4 2006. I cannot explain the reason for this discrepancy. I do not recall discussing the fire resistance of cavity barriers with Harley, the SELP design team, or anyone else. That, of course, does not mean it didn't take place. Now, do you remember whether a conscious decision was made to specify a cavity barrier product with a greater fire resistance than the minimum fire resistance given by approved document B? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I was acting on advice from someone.
Right. Did Mr. Well, who told you or instructed you to do that?
To put cavity barriers in there at all?
Yes. You say I was acting on advice from someone. Whose advice?
That's what I can't recall. I mean, I made a speculation, maybe in my statement somewhere it could have been building control, but I don't know whether I was in contact with them.
Right.
I made a speculation it could have been Exova, but now I'm thinking maybe it could have been the manufacturer themselves.
Yes, I see. Okay. Now, can I ask you to go to paragraph 126 of your statement? Just below, you refer there to a drawing of a typical bay window. You see that? And you say it suggests cavity barriers at the window reveals. You see that?
Yes.
Was it your intention when inputting into these drawings, or updating them, to include cavity barriers around the windows, namely at the head, the jamb, and at the sill?
That I don't recall. I mean, this paragraph is an assumption of what I could have thought, but it's not based on a specific recollection.
Well, let's see how we go with some specific drawings. Can I just show you 2 versions of the drawing you refer to in this paragraph? I'm going to show you, first of all, and we can have them up on the screen at the same time, please. That would be very helpful. SEA 00002155 and also SEA 00002163. So 2155 and 2163, please. Now you can see that on the left-hand side we've got 2155 and the right-hand side 2163. Looking at 2155 to start with on the left, you can see that on the right-hand side of that drawing, which may have to be expanded, it says cavity barrier TBC. You see that?
Yes.
Just the second entry down. And if you look at the drawing on the right-hand side of the screen, 2163, we can see there that there is now a cavity barrier in line with the compartment floor.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. So is it fair to say that the second drawing is a more advanced version of the first?
Yes.
Yes. Is it likely that you were the one who updated the drawing?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Did you discuss your work with anyone? Did you discuss that amendment or addition with anybody?
I believe we reviewed the drawings with Bruce whenever any material change has been done.
Yeah. I see. And we can see that cavity barriers are labelled on the drawing, and the one on the right-hand side, it says, as we see, in line with the compartment floor structure.
Yes.
Does and we can also see the one on the left-hand drawings. We don't, I think, see any cavity barriers around the windows. And again, was there any discussion about that when these drawings were updated?
I don't recall discussions about that.
Right. Right. Now, you say in your statement that you think there are also cavity barriers below the window in the so-called spandrel. I don't think we see that on the drawing, do we?
It would be on the plan detail.
On the plan detail?
Yes.
I see. So not the typical bay then?
I thought the whole drawing was called typical bay, but we're looking at the section.
All right, so let's pan out and perhaps look at that whole drawing. It's on the screen, I'm afraid, in any typical bay, but we need to pan out and see the whole thing.
Yeah.
The trouble with that is that it becomes somewhat invisible, but perhaps if we look at 2163, the one on the right, have that alone up on the screen and have it in plan, then we can see, I think, perhaps what you want to refer us to. There. Can you show us where you think there was a cavity barrier below the window in the so-called spandrel?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. Can you identify, I know it's difficult because you don't have a pointer, and indeed nor do I,
Yeah.
where on that drawing there was a cavity barrier below the window in the so-called spandrel panel? Because we haven't been...
Oh, I would be referring to the detail number 2, proposed plan, sill level. It would be where the column cladding meets the flat cladding of the sill panel. That part where there's that little notch, it's fully filled with insulation or something. It's not annotated.
I see. Would that be a vertical panel, a vertical cavity barrier, as opposed to a horizontal cavity barrier?
Yes.
I see.
But I don't know whether that's or the intention was that to be
Right.
a cavity barrier.
Mr. Chairman, we're not going to finish this topic before the break because there's a little bit more detail to go, and I'm conscious of the time. I think now may be a convenient moment for a break. We are just...
How much longer do you expect?
looking at my notes, I would think no more than another 40 minutes or so. The or so.
45, perhaps.
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll have a break now. Mr. Rek, we'll break now so we can all get some lunch.
Okay. Yes.
Please remember not to talk about your evidence or anything related to it while you're out of the room. I had hoped that you'd finish this morning, but I'm afraid Council still have a few more questions for you.
Of course.
But to judge by what Mr. Millett just said, perhaps not too many. We'll see.
Okay.
All right, so could you leave us now and come back at 2:05?
Yes.
Yes?
Okay. Thank you.
Five past two, please.